So if you're just joining us, right here, two players that should be very familiar to you. On the left, Brad Nelson with his StarCityGames.com shirt. On the right, Owen Turtenwald with his Channel Fireball shirt. If you don't know this already, Owen has been playing with Team Star City for the Pro Tour and doing quite well with them.
Right, so yeah, he's a writer for Channel Fireball, which is why you get the Channel Fireball shirt, but he is a member of Team SCG. So we see both players starting off here just with some land development. In this matchup, it's pretty, I would say that Brad has to be the more aggressive deck here.
I think that is Brad's plan. This is not a particularly exciting open. A turn 2 Skierstag High Priest versus Owen Turtenwald, maybe a Farseek. Nope, he goes Mizium Mortars before any shenanigans happen. I mean, there's always the possibility of a Cartel Aristocrat and say like a Young Wolf or a Doomed Traveler turning that into an immediate demon, and Owen's like, no shenanigans.
Well, especially in a matchup where your opponent has as many creatures as Brad does, Owen is executing exactly what his deck wants to do, which is really just keep tempo by playing removal spells until he can play more powerful cards later on. That said, Brad is making that very difficult for him in the hands of now a second Cartel Aristocrat and a Voice of Resurgence to be paired up with it.
Now, one of the things, these are obviously really good cards. The Cartel Aristocrat, virtually immune to the first type of removal that tries to hit it. The Voice of Resurgence will replace itself once killed. But as every little mana gets dropped down on the table, Owen comes closer and closer to closing things out. Right now, as long as he makes a reasonable play, and that's pretty reasonable, I think that this game is slowly stepping away for Brad.
Yeah, I mean, and Owen has really one of the hallmark things with John, when it can't kill cards, it outclasses them, and we're seeing that right now. You know, Huntmaster of the Fells is one card that's essentially holding off 2 cards for Brad. We also see in Owen's hand he has a Thragtusk, so while he killed the first 2 creatures, now he's just going to make larger threats to deal with these other creatures that Brad's playing.
Okay, and that is it. Brad just picks it up and puts it away.
Wow, and that's very quick. Very quick for Brad Nelson. Brad's one of those players who doesn't like to draw things out when he believes them to be over. I've noticed that when I've watched him play in the past, you know, he's someone who's quick to scoop in a game.
Well, we remember from yesterday watching Reed Duke in a situation where it was literally unwinnable as long as the cards were remembered by his opponent, and him winning a legacy match because his opponent did not apply the Chalice of the Void that needed to be applied for Reed to not win, and Reed coming around and winning that game. Now, there is an argument to be said for not conceding. Brad here, however, looks across the table, sees the board state, looks at his hand, sees how anemic it is, and is like, you know what? Owen is Owen.
Right,
Owen
it's a little bit of a sign of respect for your opponent.
And I'm going to just save some energy, save some time, because let's pretend that Owen, for the sake of argument, wins the next round in rapid fashion. There is some value in Brad potentially having 45 minutes of a break before his next round. Now, that's not to say also, Game 2, if Brad wins it, could go long, and having a few extra minutes on the clock can really help actually make a Game 3 not end in a draw.
All right, so when players move to sideboarding here, that's probably a situation that once again is going to favor Owen. Jund is one of the most powerful decks because of its ability to sideboard so well for each matchup. As we see in this Junk Aristocrats matchup, what really helped Owen was all those early removal spells, and we'll probably see him pretty much double up on removal spells for the matchup. He actually has some things that act as multiple removal spells, and that he has Curse of Death's holds, and he also now has Pillar of Flames and an extra Tragic Slip to kind of just complement the removal suite.
In the background of this player, as you can see Andrew Shrout to the left of Brad Nelson. Andrew was 5-0 last round with his standard deck. He just took up his first loss in standard. Not such a great day in Legacy for him. Behind Owen, you can see Kerry Oliver of England playing Caleb Durward of Chicagoland, and those two players are just having I think, a pretty good day overall, but not at the total top here. Owen and Brad a little bit further ahead than they are at 8-2. Both of these players, as you mentioned earlier, are former Player of the Years.
Yeah, actually, in back-to-back years. Yeah. Brad was the Player of the Year in 2010 when he won the playoff at Pro Tour Paris with Guillaume Matignon, and then Owen the next year kind of set the first record as a player, I think one of the first players to win Player of the Year without top-8ing a Pro Tour. I believe he top-8ed 10 Grand Prix in the same season, and that was back before they doubled the number of Grand Prix.
Right, totally. It's kind of funny because I remember watching one of the Walk the Plains episodes where people were saying, oh, I'm pretty excited about top 8ing this Grand Prix. I mean, I'm not Owen Turtenwald. It's not old hat. Now, Owen looking to get a excellent finish here at the Invitational, and I don't believe that he has a Invitational top 8 yet.
No, Owen's relatively new to the Star City scene. Obviously a pretty big veteran of the Wizards Tour. But no, unlike players like Brad, he does not have a lot of big finishes on the Star City circuit.
Yeah, now, both of these players playing decks that in many ways are associated with them. Aristocrats is a deck, just period Aristocrats, the entire overarching umbrella of the archetype, is a deck that Brad has done a lot of work in at different points with Act 2, with Junk Aristocrats. Junk Aristocrats was first, I believe, posted by Sam Black as an experiment very early on in the printing of Dragon's Maze, but Brad Nelson is probably one of the players that has done the most successful work with it in tournament scenes.
Right, Brad was one of the pilots of, like, one of the big champions of the Aristocrats decks in general. After, Aristocrats won its Pro Tour, had a little bit of fell off the scene until Act 2 happened. And it's really at that point when Brad picked it up and started working on it really hard, and then eventually came up with his Junk Aristocrats list.
Yeah, Junk Aristocrats, for me, I find the deck a little bit underwhelming right now. However, obviously we have several players who are doing fairly well with it. We've got 3 players playing Junk Aristocrats who were in the top 32 of the field going into it last round.
Well, the deck has a lot more explosiveness compared to some of the other Aristocrats decks. It has, in that it has a lot of redundancy. Not only does it have Doom Travelers, but it has Young Wolves too. Not only does it have Cartel Aristocrats, but it has Varolzes. There's a lot of these different pieces that interact to make combos. It has just extra copies of them, hoping to hit them really quickly.
One of the things that really helped out Aristocrats, if you ask me, is that the change to the Legend/Planeswalker rule makes a card like Garruk a little bit more powerful. We see a turn 1 Overgrown Tomb from Brad and back to Owen, who does the same.
Right, so once again we're going to see players trading lands. Brad mulliganed, I believe, a pair of times, and he only has 1 land in his hand right now, so he missed his second land draw.
And turn 2 Voice of Resurgence, the first real action on the game.
Right. So Brad actually, with the land there is able to make sure he still presents threats. He's down 1 land, so it'd be similar to if Owen had cast a Farseek, more or less. But once again, he's gonna have to keep putting pressure on, because the more lands Owen makes and the longer this game goes on, the harder it's gonna be for Brad to push damage across.
In terms of difficult cards for Owen to deal with, Brad does have Obsidian Ghost Council in his sideboard, and that is surprisingly a rough card. There are 2 Putrefies in Owen's main deck, but it's just a difficult card to handle. Brad adds to the table a Doomed Traveler and a Skirsdog High Priest.
Right, so now he's 1 sack outlet from having his combo online. The real question is whether or not Owen will let him get that combo online. It seems unlikely that Owen doesn't have at least 1 kill spell in his hand, and we'll see how he chooses to kind of dissect this board. The Scavenging Ooze here actually interacts with the Junk Aristocrats deck. Basically, it's just a glorified blocker. It's a 2/2 that becomes big enough to eventually, stop an attacker each turn. Really, I doubt that we'll see Owen get very aggressive with the Scavenging Ooze at any point before the game is long over.
Attack.
Maybe. All right. So. Where?
And Owen follows up, 3 mana, Bonfire for 1.
Yeah, that's going to take care of the Doomed Traveler.
I think we're going to see a Tragic Slip as a follow-up.
Right. So really, Owen just wanted to make sure that a creature died there, and he does get the Skirsdog High Priest off the board. I'm interested, like I said before, by the decision to attack with Scavenging Ooze there. I think Owen, at least with when he's coupling the damage from the Bonfire, it looks like he's more than happy to turn this into a racing situation.
I also think he was hoping to have a chump block happen from Brad, and then get a free use of the Tragic Slip. Again, in with the Ooze.
Yeah, and I guess one of the powers of Ooze here is that, Owen can somewhat win a race by gaining life back, or, as we see here, by casting a second Bonfire of the Damned. This one on for 2.
Bonfire for 2 clears the table, and then the Voice of Resurgence brings back an Elemental. And then we see a Tragic Slip from Brad to finish off the Ooze.
So Brad has recovered decently well from his start of one land, missing a second land drop. But it seems like it's only going to take, a Thrag Tusk for Owen to start to shore up the game.
Owen has a Thrag Tusk in hand. I guess I'm not sure that I would call Brad's situation recovered.
Yeah, I mean, the current board is recovered, but it really depends on Owen's hand. Yeah, it's unlikely that Owen doesn't have a follow-up threat, just like that.
And looking at Brad's list, very few cards that he has that match up well with the Thrag Tusk. Really what Brad needs to do in order to beat this deck, I think, is to get something like a Skursdog High Priest going. And unfortunately for Brad, Owen just keeps on tearing up that attempt.
Yeah, Owen's pretty aware of, and that's why the removal deck's really good, is Owen's aware of which cards can beat what he has in his hand. And as you've seen, he has not let the Skursdog Brad untap yet with a Skursdog High Priest. Every time it's meta kill spell. The first one was Tragic Slips, the second one was Bonfired for 2.
Brad mulling over his options here, which are rapidly diminishing.
Yeah, I mean, he's going to have to find a way past the Thrag Tusk. So the 5/3 body's manageable. Probably the more difficult challenge for him is the fact that Owen gained 5 life off it, and that actually Brad has to be worried about counter racing right now. Brad is at 7 life, so Thrag Tusk, he can't just race Thrag Tusk.
And he makes a wolf with Garruk Relentless. That makes his elemental a 3/3. Then he serves the 3/3 in towards Owen, basically saying, come on, Thrag Tusk, let's trade.
Right, it'll be interesting. Owen can trade it here, which I think we might see him do. He also may want that 5 power. With Kessig Wolfrun, he can swing 8 power Trampling, which forces at least 3 damage through, which will give Owen the option to kill Garruk or go at Brad's life total. It'll be interesting to see the choice he makes. I believe Owen, one of his 2 remaining cards, is an Olivia Voldaren as well. So Owen has plenty of ways between Kessig Wolfrun and Olivia to close out the game. What he really has to be concerned with is making sure that there's still a game there for him to close out. He has to make sure that his life total is kept reasonably high.
One of the things, and then he goes for the block. One of the things to think about is if he does not go for that block, he has a 5 power and a Kessig Wolfrun. But if that Voice of Resurgence blocks, that'll mean that there are 2 elementals. And those 2 elementals, then definitely a wolf, and who knows what else, could become a very dangerous proposition.
It actually helps Brad's clock to have that Voice of Resurgence die. And you'll see here, Owen is doing what Jund does best, which is just out-resourcing his opponent. He's trying to offer more trades if possible. And rather than killing the Voice of Resurgence, he's going to kill the Voice of Resurgence, but do it in a more devastating way. So they get that second point of damage via Olivia Voldaren.
And now notice that he, in doing that, has now a 4/4 in play versus a Garruk, which cannot fight it successfully.
Right, so Owen was really, so he made sure that he only cast the Olivia on 6 when he could make it a 4/4, so that Garruk can't take care of it. And Olivia tends to be the bane of a lot of creature decks. It's one of Jund's good ways of closing out creature matchups. On Brad's side, he's going to have to find a way to deal with it before he can win. His deck has a couple ways. It has really just the Tragic Slips, I believe, outside of and nothing else on the board that really helps deal with Olivia once it's resolved.
Brad thinking here, one possible line of play amongst many is attacking into Olivia with his elemental, and then if Owen were to block, to fight the Olivia with the Garruk. That's not a very exciting line, though, honestly.
Well, I mean, it's unlikely that Owen will block here, just because of that. I think Owen
for 2.
Yeah, Brad makes it a 2 power. Owen's still not blocking it.
And then it looks like there's a wolf after the fact. You might wonder, why didn't Brad make the wolf first? Well, that would mean he couldn't even attack.
Right, because he needed to threaten that fight so that Owen wouldn't block.
And Owen comes on in, and
Wolf runs it for
run,
lethal.
and done.
So Owen Turtenwald, 2 games to 0, dispatches Brad Nelson. So between Brad and Jerry, Owen back-to-back wins both those matches 2-0, stays with 2 losses, this time moving up to 9-2 with 1 round of Standard to go before they switch back to Legacy.
That's right. Now, Owen is in some ways just being a giant slayer here. coming on in and just going, smack, smack, smack.
Right. So for those of you wondering, in a 16-round tournament, what it takes to make the top 8, typically, any player that finishes with 3 losses is considered, is almost certainly in the top 8. Even a 4th loss will not, you'll still be in contention with a 4th loss.
I guess I will push back on you a little bit.
All right.
In a 16-round tournament that has the amount of numbers required for a 16-round tournament, that's usually true.
Okay.
But we have a 16-round tournament with many less players than that. And we have had the top 8 go down to